What's going on, guys? Billy here, and today we're going to be covering all the different settings and menus that are associated with the DJI FPV drone that are available to change here through the DJI goggles. So we're going to take a deep dive through all the menus, cover what all the different settings mean, and how they're going to change what your drone does and how it operates so you guys can set your drone up for the best experience possible when you go out and fly. Now, most of my settings videos are pretty easy to make. They're really straightforward. I do a screen recording of the companion app as I walk through what all the different settings and what all the different menus have to offer. But unfortunately, this time around with the DJI FPV drone, all you can do is change the settings through the goggles. There is the Fly companion app, but that's only good for doing like a couple of things. You can update the firmware, you can unlock certain geozone areas, and you can also see like a live feed from the drone, and that's it. You can't do anything. I really do hope in the future they build out the Fly app and give it a lot more flexibility and functionality to change what the FPV drone does and make it into a more full-fledged app like we're used to with some of DJI's other drones. But for now, what I'm going to have to do is use a GoPro to record the inside of the goggles as I walk through and try to look through the other side of the goggles. So bear with me as we walk through the menu and the different settings here, because it is going to be a little bit more difficult than usual. All right, so jumping inside of the goggles, the on-screen display here is the first thing that we are presented with. You can think of this as our heads-up display that gives us all of the vital information that we need at a glance as we're flying around. So starting up in the top right corner, we've got the recording time remaining left on the SD card inside of our drone, as well as the goggles if we want to record some of that backup DVR footage. And it's going to display this in terms of like a time remaining. So it's going to show hours, minutes, or seconds remaining available on your SD card, depending upon the size of the card and what you've already got stored on there. So that shows your remaining capacity left on the cards. Now jumping to the bottom left corner of the screen, we first see our flight mode. It's right now a red N because we're inside. We don't have any sort of GPS connected, so it's showing in red. And also it's in N. It's normal mode because we're just sitting here inside. And this is going to change with you as you move throughout the different flight modes like sport mode and manual mode. Now next to that, we've got our flight telemetry. It shows us our height and our distance, as well as our vertical and horizontal speed. So we can see how far away our drone is and how high our drone is, as well as how fast we're traveling, both forwards, backwards, left and right, or even up and down. It's all displayed right there in the bottom left corner with the flight telemetry. Now jumping over to the bottom right side of the screen, the first icon towards the left here is the battery percentage remaining on our drone's battery. And just next to that, it also shows us our estimated flight time remaining dependent upon how much percentage we have left in that battery, as well as our current flying style. So if we're flying really fast and aggressive, it's going to show a lower estimated time for our flight time. But if you're flying a little bit more reserved, maybe you're flying in normal at a slower speed, you're going to see a higher estimated flight time. Now moving over to the right one icon, we can see the status of our obstacle avoidance sensors, which right now is red because we're inside and they can't pick up any data or any information. That's also why we've got this error that's kind of sitting above this row of icons. So right now it's red because our obstacle avoidance is not available, but if you see that turn white, that means it is available and it's on and it's working. Now moving over one more icon to the right, we can see the connection status of our drone, as well as the signal strength that's beaming between the remote controller and the drone itself. We can see the RC connection, so that's the control that you're inputting into your sticks that go to the drone itself. And we can also see the transmission signal from the actual live feed, so that picture that's being transferred back to your goggles. So you can see the connection status of both of those kind of stacked right on top of each other. Now one more icon over to the right, we can also see the amount of satellites connected to our drone that aid it to fly in those GPS modes. And for the final icon here in the very bottom right corner is the percentage of battery remaining inside of our goggles. So moving along here from the on-screen display, if we want to access some of the different settings and menus available for the FPV drone, we're going to want to tap on the 5D button on the top right side of the goggles. This gives us 4 different options. We've got status, album, transmission, and settings. So under status, it simply just shows us a running list of all the different status errors that are available currently with our FPV drone. So you'll see, because I'm inside, I've got a GPS and vision system error because of course the drone can't see and can't connect to satellites. But if you've got any other status errors, they can be found here under the status section. Now moving on, we have got our album storage. So this shows us all of the different footage and photos, potentially if you want to shoot photos with this drone, that are stored on the goggles storage. So that's the SD card that you put inside of the goggles. It's a lower resolution, but I enjoy having that backup footage as a just in case. It also allows me to go and find the drone if I crash it, which luckily I haven't had to use yet. But regardless, it's a great backup option, and it gives you the option to just preview and look over the footage that you shot. So within Album, you can go and review all the photos, if you shoot them, and videos you take with this drone. Now moving down, the next section that we have here is the transmission settings, and under Pilot, we can choose the broadcasting mode. We can turn this on or off. So this allows us to share our feed with other people that have the same goggles so that they can watch as we fly around. We can turn this on or off. We also have the option to choose what aspect ratio we want to view the transmission in, either 16:9 or 4:3. Typically, I'll just go with 16:9 because this gives me a good understanding of what the actual video footage is going to look like. But if you want a little bit more room to see what's up above and what's down below your drone, you could change that to 4:3 to get just a little bit wider of a field of view, and again, see a little bit further up and a little bit further down. Now, the next thing that we have here in the list is focus mode. We can turn this off, on, or we can just leave it on auto. So basically what this does is it's an indication that your signal is getting weak, and it's going to narrow the signal bitrate to the center of the screen. So you'll notice that the outside of the screen begins to get all pixelated while the middle is a little bit more clear, and this can be really helpful to get you out of a sticky situation. So I typically leave this on so that if I do end up losing signal as I'm flying away and further from myself, I'm able to still see the center of the screen and get out of trouble and get my drone back closer to me so that I can actually maintain a nice healthy signal. Now finally, we've got channel mode, and I like to leave this just on auto so that the drone itself finds a good channel with the less amount of frequency for me to fly on so that I get the overall best experience. Now from here, that's pretty much wrapping up all of the different transmission system settings. We can jump over to the audience mode, which allows us to go and find other people broadcasting their signal. So if I'm flying with some friends and they've got their goggles, I can go under audience and I can watch them fly their drone around. Now from here, we're going to jump down to the settings section, and this is like the meat and potatoes of everything that you can change about the FPV drone. We've got safety, control, camera, display, and about, and we've got a lot of different things we can change inside of here, so let's get things started. Now inside of the safety mode, we can choose our max flight altitude. This allows us to choose how high we can fly with our drone, so it's going to give us a hard limit, and let's say that our max altitude is 300 feet. If you're cruising around in manual mode, and if you go up to that 300-foot limit, it's actually going to kick you out of manual mode. So I've got mine set to 1640 here, 1,640 feet, so that the drone doesn't just kick me out of manual mode. That would be very annoying. Also, we've got the max flight distance. This allows us to choose how far away our drone is able to fly. Again, it kind of sets a hard limit. I've turned this limit off. Next up, we've got RTH altitude. This allows us to choose what RTH or what altitude the drone is going to RTH at or return to home. So right now I've got mine set just a little over 300 so that if there's anything around in the area, the drone is going to safely fly up above everything in the area and then come back to me. Now underneath of that, we've got the option to update our home point, which can be useful if you end up moving to a new location while your drone is up in the air, or if you just think that your takeoff location wasn't all that safe and you want to update to a different spot. Now moving on down the list here, we've got obstacle slowing, which essentially automatically slows down your drone if you get too close to an obstacle. Don't worry, if you've got this turned on, it's not going to automatically slow you down in the faster sport mode or in full manual mode when you're flying around in acro, but instead this is dedicated more towards those that are flying in normal flight. And I would say that this is a great thing to turn on for beginners if you're afraid you're going to crash your drone and you get too close to obstacles. So the drone will slow itself down and give you some more time to react. But for me, if you're somebody that's been flying drones for a while, I would just turn this off so that you can get the full freedom of flying the drone around. Now underneath of that, we've got the option to calibrate both the compass and the IMU. We've also got a Find My Drone feature here, which doesn't work like the Find My Drone feature in the Mavic drones. It doesn't show you like a map of your last known location of the drone. I would hope that they would bring this function to like the Fly application because it really could be helpful. But right here within the goggles, if we click on Find My Drone, it shows us the last recorded footage available on the SD card or the DVR on our actual goggles, which can be handy if you need to find out where your drone went down. But again, I don't think that this is as solid of an option as using something like a map that would be used with other drones. Now, the final option we have under the safety section is the advanced safety settings, which come with a lot of really important things we need to look over before we fly. First, we've got our aircraft signal lost action. So this basically tells the drone what to do when the signal is lost between the remote controller and the drone, or in this case, also the goggles and the drone. So we can choose for the drone either either hover, land, or return home. And I think that for 99.999% of people, they want the drone to return home. They don't want it to hover or land in some faraway location. Instead, they want it to fly up and back to them. But I can say that there are certain scenarios where you'd want the drone to just hover or land. So let's say that you're using the FPV drone in a large interior space, let's say a big warehouse, for example. You don't want the drone to return home if you lose connection, fly up 300 feet, smash into the ceiling, and then fall to the ground. Instead, you want it to hover or land. So just make sure that before you fly, you set this appropriately, dependent upon what you're doing. Now, moving on from here, you've got the auxiliary LED. You can turn to choose this on or off, or you can just leave it on auto. That is that bright LED underneath that helps the drone land when it's coming down in low light scenarios. Also, we can turn on or off air sense. So this allows us to choose whether or not we want the goggles to beep at us when there is a nearby helicopter or aircraft that is manned. Now, I will say that this is a great feature, but it's not really as built out in the FPV drone as it is in, say, the Mavic Air 2, because even though it beeps and lets us know where that other manned aircraft is at, there's no map to refer to. So it's there and it works, but it's kind of like a half-baked feature. So if you want it there, you can turn it on. I think it's a great feature, but of course, if it's annoying to you, then you can just turn it off. And finally, the last thing we have in the safety section is emergency propeller stop. So as you're flying around, you can complete a certain action with your remote controller to make the propellers stop mid-air, so that if you say are coming near like a manned aircraft or an area that you don't want to fly in, you can kill the motors while you're up in the air and the drone will essentially just tumble down. Now, moving down here to the next section inside of the menu, we've got our control settings, and depending upon what remote you have hooked up to the drone at your current time of looking through the settings, it's either going to highlight the remote controller or the motion controller. Now, in this case, I've got my regular remote controller hooked up, so when we select those settings, we can choose our button customization for the custom modes and the custom switches. So we've got the C1 button on the front of the drone, as well as the C2 switch on the back right of the drone. And here are some of the different things you can choose within these custom buttons. So you can choose to make the ESC beep so that you can find it if the drone has gone down. You can choose to change the coordinated turn mode angle when you're flying in sport mode. So whether you want it to have like a larger or smaller roll angle. You can also turn on that auxiliary LED and cycle through the different modes. You can choose the arm LED color and cycle through the different colors they have, as well as the different patterns they have. So you can choose that arm LED pattern. You can also turn the head LEDs on or off, and you can activate turtle mode. Now, as for that custom mode switch on the back, the manual switch is actually turned off out of the gate. It's just another sport mode. So if you want to fly in full acro, in full manual with this drone, you got to go down to custom mode, turn manual on, and then you can go right from there. Now, moving on, we've got our stick mode up at the top. So I fly in mode 2. This is really personal preference, but this is going to change how the sticks respond to your input and which way the drone moves and how it operates. So you've got mode 1, mode 2, and mode 3. Now, moving on here, the next section that we have built into the remote controller settings are the gain and expo settings. So we can tweak the center sensitivity, the max rate, and the expo. And this is something I'm going to go into much more depth in a future video. I'm going to give it its own dedicated video because it's really important to change how your drone is going to react to your controller's input. Because I remember when I first got the drone with the stock rates, the stock center sensitivity, and the stock expo settings, I didn't like how it flew. But as soon as I went outside and I really tried to dial these in, I enjoyed flying a whole lot better. And I've tuned my drone here to fly more smoothly and more cinematically, so the sticks aren't as twitchy or aren't as sensitive. So with center sensitivity here, we'll work our way from left to right. I had somebody explain this to me really well because I was a little bit confused as to what it does. So I'm going to read this word for word. They said that this is how sensitive the expo is from center stick deflection, or how much the movement of the stick at the center position translates into drone movement. So just like it says here, I would say that this is how sensitive the sticks are as you move it off of that center point. And I've got mine set fairly low at 200. Now, the max rate is how fast the drone is going to move in these different directions: roll, pitch, and yaw. I've got mine set fairly low, so it's at 60 degrees. So it's going to move 60 degrees per second, which for some people might still feel a little bit fast, but it certainly isn't as fast as somebody might set if they're going to be flying in more of like a freestyle manner. But again, for me, a smooth cinematic flyer, 60 is perfect. So as I do little changes, as I'm cruising along the ground, it's not going to totally twitch around to the side. Now, finally here we have expo, which is basically how the drone is going to interpret your stick movements on the remote controller. And the higher you have these set, or the further away from 0 you have them set, the longer it's going to take for the drone to react to your input on the sticks. Again, I'm going to be posting a much more in-depth video on these settings in the future. So if you want to learn more about how to kind of tweak how your drone flies using these settings, be sure to subscribe and stay tuned again for that upload. Now, moving on, underneath of that chart that shows the center sensitivity, max rate, and expo settings, we can turn on the M mode attitude limit, and you can think of this as like a set of training wheels for somebody that is just learning how to fly in full acro. So with this turned on, the drone is not going to flip all the way forwards, all the way backwards, or do a barrel roll from side to side. Instead, there's limitations in place so you can still fly in that full manual mode, get a feel for the sticks, but again, the drone is not going to totally do a flip because that's how you begin to get disoriented, and then overall, that is how you're going to end up crashing. So if you're somebody, again, that is just learning how to fly in manual, this would be a great thing to turn on to kind of put some training wheels on. And if you want to learn more about all the flight modes available here within the DJI FPV drone, I'll leave a link to my previous video up in the top right corner, and I'll put my playlist down in the description that shows you all of the videos I've uploaded so far on the DJI FPV drone. Now, the final thing that we can change here within the remote controller settings is the RC calibration, which isn't really a setting, but if you are getting a stick error, you can come in here and calibrate your remote controller. Okay, moving on from here, if you've got the motion controller set up, you don't have as many settings to change. I mean, really, you can change like that on-screen display that shows you how your remote controller is pointed. I would honestly recommend keeping that on. I don't even know why you would turn that off. It's not annoying at all. In fact, it's very helpful. So you can turn that on and off. You can view some video tutorials, but more importantly, you can actually calibrate all of the sensors inside of the motion controller. So if you've got any errors, you want to make sure that, if your drone is flying a little bit erratic and it's not dead on with the motion controller, you come in here and you calibrate all of those different sensors. All right, so moving on down the list here in our control settings, we've got the LED settings, which allows us to change those really cool customizable LEDs on the FPV drone. Of course, that's been something that everybody's talking about. It really does add to like the badass factor of this drone. So you can choose to turn on or off the head LEDs that are kind of closer to the motors there. Also, you can change the arm LED color. They've got a lot of cool customization options, and you can further customize those arm LEDs by choosing the pattern of which they kind of emit off of the drone, right? You can choose to turn them off. You can keep them always on, or you can have them pulse or wave. So there's a lot of really cool customizable options in there. And finally, you can change the brightness of those LEDs if you want to kind of turn them down or up. So a lot of cool customizable options from there. Now moving on, we have our gimbal pitch speed. We've got slow, normal, and fast. I find myself liking the middle here in normal so that the gimbal doesn't pitch up or down too slow or too fast. Now I find myself changing this pretty frequently while I'm flying around in manual mode, which is a reason why I really like this drone, so that as I'm flying a little bit faster, I can pitch that gimbal up further to kind of compensate for the further pitch angle of the drone. And when I find that I use slow or fast, I feel like I'm really kind of, I guess, clumsy on the gimbal wheel, but with normal, it's perfect. I can get right on the degree angle that I need, no questions asked. So I keep mine on a normal pitch speed. It just kind of is what I'm comfortable with. Now moving on from here, we can calibrate the gimbal if we're getting an error or some sort of abnormality with the camera and gimbal system. We've also got coordinated turn here. So as I mentioned in my flight mode video, we can choose what we want the drone to do in sport mode. Do we want it to have no roll angle, so the drone is going to try to keep that horizon as straight as possible? Do we want the drone to bank a little bit further to the left and right, so that's a small roll angle? Or do we want it to really fully bank and give us a full immersive FPV experience? That is our large roll angle. Now moving on, we've got our unit selection. So dependent upon what you use, you can choose between metric or imperial. And yeah, that all pretty much wraps up our control settings from there. So now we'll move on to our camera settings. So the first thing we have to change here is our camera parameters. And basically from here, we can choose like the shutter speed, the ISO, we can choose our saturation, our white balance. And quite frankly, I leave all of this on automatic because the last thing I need to worry about is my camera exposure settings while I'm flying a drone at 80 miles an hour. So everything is on automatic. I do bump my exposure value up to plus 0.3, and my white balance also is on fully automatic. But I do understand that it is a good thing that they give you the option to select manual camera settings for those just in case moments. But again, for pretty much everyday flying, I've got mine set to automatic. Moving on from here, we've got our transmission quality. We can choose between high quality and low latency. And this really does impact how your drone flies and how the signal is going to be coming back to your drone, as well as the quality that you can record in. So if you've got high quality selected, you are going to have a little bit of a higher latency. It's going to be coming in at 40 milliseconds, but we get the option to shoot 4K video. Now, if you choose low latency, we are going to get a lower latency. Of course, as the name says, it's going to come in at around 28 milliseconds, but we don't get the option to record in 4K. Now, we do get a higher frame rate coming back in that live view. It's going to be up to 120 frames per second. So low latency is really great for if you are like going to be racing with the drone, but if you want to shoot footage, honestly, I would take the trade-off of a higher latency, even though it's really not noticeable to me, so that I can shoot in 4K. Now, building off of that, we can also change the video quality and frame rate that our camera is going to be recording in. I've got mine set to 4K at 60 frames per second. I want to shoot in the highest resolution possible, but if frame rate is something that's important to you, you can choose like 1080p at a higher 120 frames per second, or you can just kind of choose what suits you best. So from here, you can choose what video quality and what frame rate you want your camera to shoot in. Next up, you've got video format. You want to choose .mp4 or .mov. Basically, the rule of thumb here is if you're going to be editing on a PC, use MP4, and if you're editing on a Mac, use MOV. Next up, we've got grid lines. Those are the lines you saw on my on-screen display. I find that turning these on kind of helps me line up shots and make sure that I'm flying straight and making sure that, like, if I'm going to try to fly through a tight gap, I can make it. I can line it up with a center point. So I've got those turned on to make flying easier. Now, the center point, I've also got this turned on. I actually just mentioned that. So that does build upon what the grid lines offer. Format SD card. Once we tap on this, it's going to format the SD card inside of our drone. So if you want to totally clear everything off, start from scratch, you can select on that. And then finally, we do have an advanced camera settings section. So within here, we can choose to record with both the aircraft, the goggles, or just the aircraft and just the goggles. So if you've got an SD card in both, you can choose whether or not you want to just record to the aircraft or just record to the goggles. For me, I find that recording to both is really what you want to do, because then you've got duplicate files. It's just another form of redundancy. Also, you can choose to auto record on takeoff. I find that this is a very important feature to have turned on because I always forget to hit the record button before I take off. So I'm really glad that they implemented this here inside of this drone. Also, EIS, this is the electronic image stabilization. You can choose to turn this on or off. This is basically rock steady, and I don't know really why you'd have it turned off. So I'd keep this on so that when you look back at your footage right off the SD card, it's going to be nice and smooth. Now you can also choose to remove the distortion. It's called distortion correction. And what's really great about this is that you can leave the distortion correction turned on the aircraft, but off on the goggles, or vice versa, or you can turn off distortion on all fronts. Now, typically what I like to do is turn the distortion off on my aircraft, but I leave them on the goggles, so I get a nice true view of what the drone is looking at as I'm flying around, and it's not distorted in any way. It's giving me the true view of the camera. So I leave the aircraft distortion correction turned on, but my distortion is turned off in the goggles. Does that make sense? I hope that it does, but this is the section I have here. It's pretty much turned on to aircraft only. Now moving on, we've got our image roll correction, and this basically turns the electronic image stabilization on that roll axis on or off. So when it's turned on and you're flying around in normal mode, the camera is going to enable basically a second axis within the gimbal that again is not mechanical, but it's electronic, so that you can fly more like a GPS drone with a 3-axis gimbal opposed to feeling the banks of the drone as it turns from side to side. So that's going to kind of add in a little bit more stabilization, but if you're going to be flying in manual, keep this off because it's not going to help you at all. In fact, I had it turned on one time and it kind of made me sick inside of the goggles. Now moving on from here, we've got our video codec format. They give us the option of H.264 and H.265. So I use the higher efficiency codec here, the H.265 codec. And also we can choose the color. So we can choose between decinelike and normal. I've got decinelike turned on so that I get a higher dynamic range, a flatter image that I can play with. And the final two things that we have here are anti-flicker. I've just leave this on auto so that if I'm flying at nighttime, the lights aren't going to flicker inside of my shot. And I also like to turn audio recording on. So it actually records audio on the drone. It can be really helpful for when I'm trying to sync up different clips in post, but also I think it's really cool to just hear the propellers flying around and to hear the throttle as I'm kind of pitching it further forward and flying at a faster speed. Now, as we jump out of the advanced camera settings, the final thing that we have to choose from within the camera settings as a whole is reset camera parameters, which will reset all your camera settings to default. If you find that you're just kind of messing things up and you want to go back and start fresh, you can just reset everything and it's going to start you back to those default settings. Now moving on from here, we finally have the display settings, and from here we can choose the brightness of the display. We can go from 0 all the way to 6. We can also choose the zoom of the display inside of the goggles. So if you find that it's a little bit too wide and you can't really see everything, you can actually punch the view in all the way to 50%. And even though it's a smaller screen, it actually can be easier to focus on. So that is a good thing to change if you find that it's just too big inside of the goggles and it's kind of hard to see everything around the screen. And finally here we can turn the home point on and off within the goggles. So as you're flying around, you can actually see an H that's there displayed on the screen to show you where your home point is at. So really there's no reason to turn that off. And I think that pretty much wraps it up. We do have an about section here that I'm not going to click into because it gives the serial number away of all of my devices. But what I did find pretty interesting is that within here, you are able to see the cycles of charge on your battery, which is important to monitor. And also you can switch your goggles to the DJI digital FPV system instead of the actual FPV drone itself. Wow, 22 minutes I think that was of just straight talking about the settings and modes. I am pretty much worn out after doing that. Quite frankly, I thought it was going to be a lot quicker, but I was wrong. I rambled on for a couple of sections, but regardless, I think it was a good overview of everything this drone has to offer in the settings, and hopefully you guys were able to take something away and learn about some sort of section or some sort of mode or menu or different feature that this drone had that you maybe didn't know about or didn't know what it meant. Anyway guys, I hope you enjoyed the video. Let me know if you have any questions down below in the comment section below, and as always, I'll talk to you later. Peace.